Let's answer some questions, shall we? Here comes yet another theist with yet another list of questions that atheists can easily answer. But the theists won't pay any attention, will they? And there's a reason for that, as will be revealed coming up next. I haven't done this for a while, but I came across this video by Adherent Apologetics where he wants to ask atheists 36 questions. Sure, okay, I'll bite. Here are my answers. But these questions are not being asked honestly, and that seems to be a problem with a lot of theists. They aren't curious about what we think. They're trying to use these questions as a gotcha, so they can just try to convert us. Pal, if you had anything that would convert us, you would have done it by now. You don't understand anything about us, nor do you care. This is just a sham. So let's look at the questions and see why it's all so dishonest.
Why is there something rather than nothing?
That's a nonsensical question that doesn't have anything at all to do with atheism or religion. And this question shows up on lists like this all the time. It's so that the religious can just arbitrarily claim that things exist because God made things exist. But how do they know that? How do they prove that? Why isn't it just as worthwhile to say Barney the dinosaur made it, or invisible, intangible, universe-creating pixies made it? You can't prove me wrong, and I don't have to prove myself right, at least according to you people. So let's try to get to a question that actually means something.
Is there any evidence that suggests the universe is eternal?
What difference does it make? Again, this is more a question for scientists, not atheists. The answer is, we don't know, and neither do you. And it really doesn't matter because the answer doesn't lend credence to your beliefs one way or the other. So please, come up with better questions. Next.
If not, why do atheists hold on to this idea and say that you have debunked the Kalam?
The nature of the universe has nothing at all to do with debunking Kalam. Kalam debunks Kalam. Kalam fails because it makes irrational and fallacious claims, and the conclusion does not arise logically from its premises. Kalam, like all religious philosophical arguments, is faulty on its own. It doesn't need our help to fall apart.
If so, why do the vast majority of scientists reject this idea?
Which idea? That the universe is eternal? Who cares? Because it has nothing at all to do with anything. And this is what happens when the religious think that there's some kind of a mad conspiracy to prove them wrong. No, they haven't proven themselves right. They haven't even tried. You still have all of your work to do, and playing these silly word games doesn't give your position any more rational validity. Do better!
Why is the universe so fine-tuned?
It's not. Now, first, you'd have to define what you mean by fine-tuned. It certainly isn't fine-tuned for humanity, considering that the overwhelming majority of the universe is deadly to mankind. Huge swaths of our own planet are unlivable without technological advancements. Is it fine-tuned for life? Not that we can tell, and we only have a single example of planetary life as it is to compare it to. The religious don't seem to understand what it is that they're talking about. Do we have physical constants? Yes. Does everything follow those physical constants? Yes. Why? Because they developed where those physical constants existed. Everything that you see is the way that it is because of how it developed. There was no plan, there was no design that we can find. Stop making things up.
If your answer is the multiverse, why is there no evidence for this theory?
It has nothing to do with any potential multiverse, which is supported mathematically, but no, we haven't found any physical evidence of it. The answer isn't the multiverse, it's reality.
Is it possible that there is no natural explanation for the origin of life?
Possible? I don't know. But we have plenty of ideas, and so far at least, there's no reason to call upon anything supernatural to explain everything that we see. Just because we don't currently understand it doesn't mean that we might not get there sometime in the future. And we have never once found a single mystery in the universe whose answer turned out to be God. All of them have natural explanations. I don't know is not God did it.
Where does consciousness come from?
It's an emergent property of the brain. There is no evidence of any kind that anything else is going on. If someone suffers brain damage, and there's tons of examples of this, their mental state changes based on the damage they've received. There are even cases of split brain patients where one side of their brain believes in God and the other side does not. All of this is very easily explained.
Do you lack a belief that God exists, or would you say that God does not exist?
Now, it depends on what you're talking about. I lack belief in all gods because I have seen no evidence whatsoever that any gods actually exist. But there are plenty of conceptions of gods that are logically contradictory or wholly irrational, and those gods, by their very conception, cannot exist. So, both, maybe. Depends on your specifics.
Do you just lack a belief that Zeus exists, or do you believe that Zeus does not exist?
Zeus is every bit as possible, theoretically, as your god. Again, depending on concept. Now, if you insist that Zeus is a real, physical entity that sits atop Mount Olympus, then no, that Zeus isn't real because we can test for it and prove it isn't there. But you can very easily redefine Zeus to be an intangible, invisible, undetectable deity, just like the Christians did with their God. Remember, God used to be visible and walked with Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. Then, people realized just how silly that was, and their definition of God changed. If you want to redefine Zeus into something akin to the Christian deity, then I simply lack belief in that formulation.
If you just lack a belief that Zeus exists, why are you centuries behind the rest of the world who says that Zeus does not exist?
Why are you so far behind the growing majority of humans who accept that your silly imaginary friend is nonsensical? Seriously, and this is very commonplace, but this guy is asking questions, then he's trying to shame people into answering the way that he wants his questions answered. But theists, by and large, are dishonest or ignorant, and I have no idea which in this case. Stop trying to steer the conversation. Ask something and let it be answered honestly.
Do you act according to what you believe or what you just lack a belief in?
My actions are not predicated on gods at all. If the religious would simply disappear off the face of the planet tomorrow, and wouldn't that be nice? But my actions wouldn't change because my actions have nothing at all to do with religion. They have to do with rationality and critical thinking and objective reason. So, nice try there, but stop being dishonest.
What evidence is there that atheism corresponds with reality?
Atheism is a reaction to religion. There is no evidence whatsoever for any gods, thus not believing in any gods is the only rational position that one can take. Until objective evidence can be demonstrated for any god, atheism will remain the only rational position available. But as I've pointed out many times before, Far too many theists look at atheists like we're just like they are. Emotionally held beliefs clung to the exclusion of all else, blind faith in something that cannot be rationally justified because fee-fees. And that's not how it works.
Is atheism a worldview?
Nope. It's a reaction to religion, as I said before. If religion ceased to exist, so would atheism, or at least the need to call ourselves atheists. If you want to know why atheists exist, look in the mirror. It's your fault. There is no worldview to atheism, and the whole idea of a worldview itself is asinine in the first place.
If not, what is your worldview?
Rationality. Following the evidence to see where it leads, not forcing an overarching concept of reality that I expect reality to conform to. Rather, what I accept must conform to reality as it is, not as I might want it to be. Like I said, worldviews are idiotic.
What would convince you that God exists?
Evidence and nothing but. Direct, demonstrable, repeatable, testable evidence that a specific deity is, in fact, provably real. And if there was a God, and he wanted me to believe in him, he'd not only know what it would take to convince me, but he'd have already provided it to me by now. As I remain unconvinced, I'm going to remain an atheist.
Are you willing to follow the evidence, wherever it leads, even if it leads to a different understanding of how the universe works?
Absolutely. And this would be your cue to produce evidence that proves that your God is real. Got any? Yeah, I didn't think so. Because so long as you're the one making these silly claims and not coughing up any evidence to back it up, I'm not going to take you seriously. This is 100% on your shoulders. Do something!
If Jesus rose from the dead, would you become a Christian?
That's two separate questions. If you could prove objectively that not only did Jesus exist, and there's no evidence for that now, but did rise from the dead and further all that God stuff was real, would I believe it? Yes, I would believe it. You have proven to me that it is real. Would I worship this God of yours? Well, if the garbage in the Bible is any indication, then no. Your God is a moral monster. Not only has he not earned my worship, he's earned my hatred, at least as a fantasy character like Voldemort. There is a difference between accepting that something is real based on the evidence and bowing down to it. Why can't you theists get that through your tiny little heads?
If you wouldn't become a Christian, why would you ever accept the fact that he rose from the dead?
If there were evidence for that, and like I said, there simply isn't, then I'd accept it as a fact based on that evidence. I accept that Hitler existed. I don't like any of the things that he did, but I still believe the Holocaust happened based on the undeniable weight of evidence. Why can't you figure that out?
Why do atheists keep insisting that faith is blind trust, when that's not what Christians or the Bible say?
Why do you think we care what you or the Bible says? It doesn't matter if your silly book defined an elephant as chocolate cake. It doesn't make it true. We look at what you're actually doing, and what you're actually doing is nowhere remotely close to what you pretend you're doing. And seriously, Hebrews 11:1. Read your own damn book. It says exactly what we're saying.
Why do you want material evidence for an immaterial God?
Prove there is an immaterial God. Prove there's any such thing as an immaterial, supernatural anything. It's just an empty claim made with no proof based on feelings. This is all nonsense that you've just made up in your head. Keep in mind that the concept of God has changed dramatically over the centuries. The ancient Hebrews didn't believe in an incorporeal, invisible super being. It was real, and it walked with people. But as time went on, they realized that, oh no, People can just prove that's ridiculous. So they simply redefine their God to hide it from the prying eyes of reality. You don't even understand where your ridiculous ideas came from.
Is there a purpose to life?
Inherently, no. Now, you can give your own life purpose, and maybe you can make the case that biologically your purpose is to reproduce. But otherwise, you're on your own. And that terrifies you people. You desperately want someone to tell you what to do, just like children do, because the religious are immature. That's a sad thing to have to say, but it's true. You decide your own purpose. You decide how you want to live your life, and you are responsible for the consequences of those decisions. Welcome to reality. It's no wonder you people hide from it.
If there is, by what standard do you determine that life has purpose?
There isn't, so let's just move on.
If not, what is the point of listening to this video?
To make a response video, to make my followers happy, to show people just how asinine the religious are, and for that, I have to thank you because you're falling into every single solitary religiously absurd trope that there is. It would be hard to ask for more. And thanks to your video and the videos of hundreds of other theists that I've done, it's not hard to prove to rational people just how irrational the religious are. You are your own worst enemies. I'm just helping you along.
Where does morality come from?
It comes from us. It doesn't come from some imaginary man in the sky. It comes from human beings. It's ultimately based on enlightened self-interest and empathy. We want to be treated well, so we treat others well in hopes that they will reciprocate. That's it. That's morality. And then it gets codified into laws and adopted by society as a whole, and children are raised to think a certain way, even though, over time, these moral and ethical laws change as we find better things. And here, you thought it came from a book.
How do you determine what is right and what is wrong?
I already described that. But whether you like it or not, right and wrong are subjective. What is considered right in maybe one state in the United States might be considered absolutely wrong in India and vice versa. There is no universal standard. Deal with it.
When a lion kills a cub from another pride, because that's what natural selection has raised it to do, is that morally acceptable?
It's morally irrelevant. Nature is what nature is. If a rattlesnake bites you and you die, is the snake acting immorally? Or is it just being a snake and doing what snakes do? Morality doesn't apply. Nature does. Morality only applies to creatures that can think and reason. And it's really a shame that I have to explain that to you.
If evolution has put a sense of morality into us to help us survive, what makes our actions better than any other animal's actions?
Evolution really hasn't, except in the most basic sense. It's made us social creatures because that helps us to survive. But how we develop societies, that's entirely up to us. Evolution didn't make us think that murder is wrong. We decided that on our own, based on enlightened self-interest. But not all societies think murder is wrong. It's just that the ones that don't, they don't tend to survive or thrive for long.
Is it morally acceptable for you to kill a toddler because you can no longer financially support it?
It depends on the situation. Can someone else take it in and give it a decent life? Then no, I would say it isn't morally acceptable. Is it going to starve to death and die miserably no matter what happens? Then yeah, absolutely it is. But this is what happens when you're looking for a one-size-fits-all answer that you don't have to think about. The religious tend to be pretty morally lazy.
Is it morally acceptable for you to kill a fetus in the womb because you could not financially support it?
Same conditions apply. There really are no yes or no moral questions. They all have to be nuanced. Except to the simple-minded, of course.
Is it morally acceptable to kill a baby after it's been born?
Next.
How can you morally differentiate between a baby in the womb at 6 months and a baby born prematurely at 6 months?
Next.
Who was Jesus?
For all we know, for all we can tell, Jesus is a myth. There's no evidence at all that Jesus was a real person. Now, of course, it depends on what you're actually talking about. Was there some Jesus analog who may have lived and taught in the first century Palestine, but who had none of the supernatural attributes that religion later stapled to him? Or are you talking about the Jesus that was described in the Bible, the magic man who rose from the dead? Because the first is a more reasonable possibility, and the second is absurdly nonsensical.
Why did his disciples say that he rose from the dead?
Well, that's what a book of mythology claimed they said, but there's no evidence they existed either. You are making an assertion that you simply cannot back up rationally. Why did Muhammad's disciples say that he flew off to heaven on the back of a winged horse? You don't believe that, right? So why should I believe what it says in your silly book of multiple choice without independently corroboratory evidence?
Why does the Bible keep lining up with archaeology?
It doesn't. Here's the reality. Back around the 1930s, the heyday of biblical archaeology, people went out into the desert with a shovel in one hand and the Bible in the other. When they found something, instead of doing actual science to find out what it was, they just opened up their Bible to find out what the Bible said it was, or whatever was close enough that they could slap a label on it. And since then, we've gone back and found out that a lot of places that were claimed to be biblical sites, well, they're not really biblical sites. Imagine my shock. Even Biblical Archaeology Review admits to the massive number of errors that have been made by religiously motivated archaeologists. This is what happens when you're not actually doing science. And here's something else. It doesn't matter if the writers of the Bible, whoever they were, because most were anonymous, wrote down real places. That lends no credence whatsoever to the supernatural claims made in the Bible, any more than we can pretend that Spider-Man is real just because he supposedly lived in New York City, and that's real. Or that Godzilla is real because Tokyo exists. This is what happens when the religiously desperately want their beliefs to be true, but are unwilling or unable to think about them critically.
Why do the three bloodiest regimes in history, that being Mao's China, Nazi Germany, and Stalin's Russia, come from atheistic ideas?
Except Nazi Germany was staunchly Christian. You know, all those guys running around with belt buckles that read "God with us." You know, Hitler who openly talked about God telling him to massacre the Jews. You know, the Catholic Church who celebrated Hitler's birthday every year and smuggled Nazi war criminals out of Germany on Catholic Red Cross visas following the end of World War II. That Nazi Germany? It's shocking how downright ignorant the religious are. And here's something else for you. There are no atheist ideas. Atheism is the answer to a single question. Do you believe in any gods? If the answer is no, then you are an atheist. It has absolutely no ramifications beyond that whatsoever. Honestly, how can you people be either so dishonest as to lie like that, or so ignorant as to be unaware of the very simple facts? You people have some very serious mental problems. See, this is where I have problems with so many theists, and it doesn't really matter what religion you're talking about. Either these people are dumb, or these people are dishonest. I can't really come up with a third option here. These questions that they ask are very easy if they have any kind of grasp on reality, but far too often, as is the case this time around, It feels like they're trying to steer the conversation. They're not curious. They don't care what atheists actually think. They're trying to convert people. They have an agenda. You don't go asking people questions to convert them. That's blatantly dishonest. But that seems to be how religion operates. Lying for the Lord is a time-tested method for trying to get your bizarre ideas into someone else's head. It's why people get so mad at the religious. If their beliefs were worth believing, they wouldn't need the underhanded tactics. They could just present their evidence dispassionately, and the weight of their evidence would convince their detractors. But they have no evidence, and their beliefs are just ridiculous. So they have to lie to people and try to trick them. They go after them when they are at their lowest and more likely to accept the emotional manipulation that is religious conversion. And they don't seem to have a problem with that. That's the sad part. They don't seem to care that what they're doing is so blatantly manipulative. Because the religious are dishonest. We need to stop pretending otherwise. It's all a scam, whether the religious realize it or not. They are scamming people. They are selling snake oil. And they're either not smart enough to recognize it, or they're doing it willingly and deserve to be called out for their dishonesty. That's really all there is to it. And it's just sad.